My name is Hannah, your moderator for the session on tropical biodiversity and natural resources and overview that will be presented by Dr. Ahmad Aldrie Amir. Dr. Ahmad Aldrie Amir is a mangrove ecologist by training. He obtained his PhD in the field of mangrove ecology from the University of Queensland, Australia in 2011. He has participated and led in several projects on various topics related to mangrove ecology, management and conservation. He has published a substantial amount of publications, two of which have recently appeared in Science in 2018 and 2019. Dr. Aldrie's primary interest and specialization on ecology and the dynamics of mangroves are now expanding through a developed interest on understanding the connectivity, complexity, and the socio-ecological systems of tropical and subtropical coastal habitats and environment, including the management, conservation, and governance of these natural ecosystems and resources. In 2017, he initiated the establishment of the Malaysian Mangrove Research Alliance and Network or My Mangrove to promote multidisciplinary and collaborative research among academia and scientists. Without much ado, I would like to pass the session to Dr. Aldrie. Dr. Aldrie, you may now begin your presentation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hannah. I'll just share my screen. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, let me just set my timer so I won't go overboard.
Okay, sure, Dr. Aldrie.
All right. Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys of the tropics and the rest of the world. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, wherever you are. So by looking at your watches and your wall clocks and recognizing the difference in time where we are all in, we do realize that the Earth, the globe, and the planet is a rotating sphere that orbits the sun, which is a primary source of energy for our galaxy. The energy from the sun provides and triggers the flourishing life on Earth. And as a globe, as a tilted rotating sphere, the spread of sunlight is uneven throughout the facade of our planet. With the variety and gradient of our lithosphere, the thickness of our atmosphere, and the influence of our hydrosphere, the interaction and influence of the energy from the sun vary throughout the globe. So, the equatorial zone that stretches latitudinally over the center of the globe in between Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn receives the highest amount of light, which evidently translated into the vibrant colors and lives of the tropics. In essence, the tropical biodiversity, which is the topic of our discussion today. So the tropic, as we know, is the zone that lies between the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn. So in the 300 BC, believing that the area near the equator was too hot for habitation, Aristotle dubbed the tropics as the torrid zone. But certainly his theory was not entirely right, as great civilizations arose in this zone, like in the Latin America, in India, in Southeast Asia. But then again, his idea was not entirely wrong in the context of general climate classification. Well, in biogeography, tropical area is divided into paleotropics on our side, in Malaysia, in this side, and the neotropics. And there are some certain variations of lineage and species diversity between both sides. So pretty much you can see very clearly the Earth isn't a homogeneous sphere. So therefore, even within the tropics, there are variation in climate condition, which determines the types of biomes and landscapes. So the key determining factors are light, temperature, and precipitation that constitute the biome. So from this graph, you can see that temperature and sunlight profiles of tropical rainforests are stable, in comparison to other terrestrial biomes, with average temperatures ranging from 20 C to 34 degrees Celsius. Month-to-month temperatures are relatively constant in tropical rainforests, in contrast to forests further from the equator. And this lack of temperature seasonality leads to year-round plant growth rather than just seasonal growth. So in contrast to other ecosystems, a consistent daily amount of sunlight provides more solar radiation and therefore more opportunity for primary productivity. And then looking at the rainfall axis, the annual rainfall for tropical rainforest ranges from 125 centimeters to more than 600 centimeters, with considerable seasonal variation. But then tropical rainforests have wet months and also dry months. But the driest month of a tropical rainforest can still exceed the annual rainfall of some other biomes like desert. So that's how, tropical rainforests have very high net primary productivity because the annual temperatures and precipitation values support rapid plant growth. Of the beauty that we have in the tropic. So experiences from explorers like Alexander von Humboldt, from his many voyages and expeditions in the tropics, that brought home messages that sparked more interest from other scientists and naturalists about the intriguing nature and the magnificent properties of tropical biodiversity and nature resources. So until today, many generations of scientists have attempted to explore and to quantify the richness of the tropics, both the biotic and the abiotic components. But still, the studies are far from being completed. There are so many things to explore. And increased knowledge and understanding on tropical biodiversity have also triggered more exploration and exploitation of resources, which nowadays we really need. It needs to be controlled and carefully managed. So tropics and other biomes in the equatorial region are the most biodiverse biomes on land, terrestrial biomes. So tropical rainforests have also been described as nature's pharmacy because of the potential for new drugs that is largely hidden in the chemicals produced by the huge diversity of plants, animals, and other organisms. Vegetation in tropical rainforests is characterized by plants with spreading roots and broad leaves that fall off throughout the year. Unlike the trees of the deciduous forests that lose their leaves in some seasons. So thank you to Mega-Biodiverse for this wonderful collage. So this explains actually tropical rainforests are characterized by vertical layering of vegetation and the formation of distinct habitats for animals within each layer. So on the forest floor, it's a sparse layer of plants and decaying plant matter. So you have microorganisms there. And then above that is an understory of short and shrubby foliage. A layer of tree rises above this understory and is topped by a close under canopy, upper canopy, the uppermost overhead layer of branches and leaves. But then you can also see in tropical rainforest some emergent, the additional trees that emerge through this close upper canopy. So these layers, all of these layers provide diverse and complex habitats for the variety of plants, animals, and other organisms. Many species of animals use the variety of plants and the complex structure of the tropical wet forest for food and shelter as their habitat. And some organisms live several meters above ground, rarely descending to the forest floor. So that's pretty much some of the variety of fauna. But then the biodiversity is rich in the tropics. Well, not only is biodiversity highest in the tropics, but the number of endemic species is also the highest. So warm temperature, high humidity, stable climate, rich fertile soil are favorable for most of the species on Earth. And living in the older region, the tropics, with these conducive conditions, the tropical communities had more time to evolve and develop more specializations to adapt. And there are also great pressure and competition from pests, parasites, diseases, which won't allow a single species to predominate. So they be diverse. Okay, so in the year 2000, Norman Myers and colleagues identified 25 terrestrial biodiversity hotspots. Yeah, so areas which are defined as the regions that harbor high diversity of endemic species. So they must have at least 1,500 species, and at the same time have been significantly impacted and altered by human activities. So Conservation International took up the idea and acted proactively, and the number of biodiversity hotspots has now expanded to 36. So these hotspots, all of them have lost, in total almost 85% of their primary vegetation, and their endemic species within an area of just 15.7% of the Earth's surface. Even though now hotspots only cover about 2%, if you look at the map, of land area, but 50% of the world's vascular plants and 42% of land vertebrates are endemic to these hotspots. Okay. And I'm proud to say that 21 out of 36 are located in the tropics, if you look closely, including the hottest hotspots. So they are, if you look at number 1, the tropical Andes, number 16, Sundaland, where we are now, most of us in Southeast Asia, and Madagascar, number 9, and Brazil's Atlantic Forest, number 4, and the Caribbean, number 3. So these hottest hotspots, is 5, contain 20% and 16% of all vascular plant and vertebrate species, respectively. But they only cover only 0.4% of the Earth's land surface. Okay, so this suggests that tangible conservation actions are urgently needed to avert land use driven catastrophic extinction in these areas. So you can check out Conservation International's website for more details on biodiversity hotspots. And of course, when we talk about biodiversity in the tropics, it's not limited to the terrestrial biomes. They are also apparent, in fact, maybe more apparent in the coastal and marine biomes. So by the way, where else can you enjoy 3S combo? I mean, the sea, sun, and sand all year long if it's not in the tropics. And ocean comprise of 76% of the tropics by area. If you look between within the tropics zone, and tropical oceans are generally shallower and warmer than in other regions and tend to be lower in nutrients and support lower density of marine organisms. But they do, however, support the most biologically diverse marine ecosystems on the planet. The oceans, and in particular coastal marine waters, are fundamental to the health and well-being of many communities in the tropics, with a large proportion of the human population dependent on marine resources for sustenance and livelihoods. So one study showed that it is estimated that the oceans provide a yearly global economic value of $21 trillion to humankind. And this capital is largely generated from critical ecosystem services such as fisheries, nutrient cycling, and climate regulation. This is an interesting graph. We talk about fish and marine catch. So fish are the primary source of animal protein for many coastal communities worldwide. In fact, the footprint actually travels globally. Communities that rely on small-scale fisheries are largely located in the tropics, and about half the wild marine catch is taken by these small-scale operations. So commercial operations are only increasing influential in the tropics. If you look closely, globally, wild marine catch quadrupled between the 1950s and then it peaked in the 1990s. Since then, if you look properly, the catches outside the tropics have declined or stabilized despite increasing fishing effort. And by comparison, exploitation of wild marine resources in the tropics has grown rapidly over the past 60 years. Although lower in overall fish biomass, the tropics' share of the overall global wild marine fish catch is increasing. So with greater demand for seafood from a growing and increasing affluent population, combined with better technology and greater fishing effort by international vessels in our waters and tropical waters, means pressure on marine fish stocks. It will likely to increase further. So this is a point to ponder. And speaking of fish stock, we cannot ignore the fact that tropical coastal habitats play an extremely vital role in their life cycle. So besides being the breeding and spawning ground for fish and other marine fauna, so corals, seagrasses, and mangroves provide outstanding ecosystem services at local and global levels. Yeah. Oops, sorry. The vast majority of coral reef systems are located in the tropics, and they are the most biologically diverse marine ecosystems and provide a range of goods and services to tropical nations. For many nations, coral reefs are important for fisheries, provide protection to the coast, and are an important source of income through tourism. If you look at Great Barrier Reef in Australia, and if you look at the center of this image of this map, the darkest region at the heart of the Indo-West Pacific is known as Coral Triangle, very close to us actually. In fact, we are part of it. Dubbed as the Amazon of the seas due to the high diversity of corals and marine species. But then coral reefs in all tropical regions are suffering from increased local and global threats. And impacts on reefs increased markedly between 1998 and 2010, with about 80% of all tropical reefs now considered to be at medium or high risk of damage. You can see if you read on past research, there were a lot of coral bleaching events happening. And yeah, the same situation and risks are faced by the seagrass ecosystems. You can see clearly in this map of the high concentration and the diversity of species too in the center of the paleotropics. So marine fauna like dugongs totally depend on seagrasses for their survival. But these beds and meadows of seagrasses are continuously threatened by coastal development, land reclamation, pollution, and so on. And unlike their neighboring corals and seagrasses, mangrove forests can only be found in the tropics and nearby warm subtropical coastlines. If you look at the green lines, coastlines that is covered by mangroves. So pretty much they are the trademark ecosystem of the tropics. And the tropics host nearly 95% of the world's mangroves by area and 99% of all mangrove species. So you can only find one species, that can tolerate colder, slightly colder temperature. That is Avicennia marina. And mangrove forests have decreased in the area since the mid 20th century in all tropical regions. So that is a worrying, and the trend is ongoing. And the greatest threats to mangroves include land clearing for agriculture, aquaculture, and coastal development. Loss of mangrove increases the risk of adverse impacts of extreme weather events on coastal communities and contributes directly to losses of fisheries resources. As you know, they are the breeding ground and spawning ground for coral fishes. And some tropical nations have recognized the value of mangrove ecosystems and are improving legislative protection as well as initiating reforestation efforts to improve coastal mangrove systems, as pointed out by Professor Joy this morning. So together, mangroves are important nurseries and habitats for marine life, living on the edge, juxtaposed in between land and sea. So they help filter pollutants from land-based runoff and they help protect nearby coral reefs and seagrass. And mangrove also share the much needed nutrient for their adjacent ecosystems. They at the same time protect the land and the coastlines from erosion and extreme oceanic events, like I mentioned earlier. But then responding to Prof. Joy's presentation again this morning, it is important, it is very crucial actually for all of us to recognize and implement adequate mitigation and adaptation measures to avoid further loss of mangroves and seagrasses, especially due to erosion, exacerbated by sea level rise. Yeah? So building bunds or seawalls and further encroachment into the dynamic systems would only be detrimental to us. But then one major point that I would like to address today is the powerful tropical mangroves and seagrasses to assist in the global plight, our global plight to combat climate change. So both mangroves and seagrass ecosystems are widely known as the most efficient carbon sequester in the world. Hundreds of studies have proven this. And together with salt marshes, they are known as the blue carbon ecosystems. And this role is increasingly recognized as one of the major contributions of the tropics to the sustainability of the planet. So all in all, with all this richness in the form of genetic, species, ecosystem diversity, 13 out of 17 tropical countries are recognized as the mega-diverse countries in the world. A recognition that actually should be taken as a huge responsibility for us to strengthen the protection of our resources. And you know what, while working on this, it is fascinating actually to note that the vibrant diversity of the tropics are also reflected in the variety of cultures and languages of the people of the tropics. Yeah? This is an important component of biodiversity, I reckon. And I just got to know that more than 50% of the world's languages are being spoken in just 8 tropical countries. Imagine, namely India, Brazil, Mexico, Australia, Indonesia, Nigeria, Papua New Guinea, and Cameroon combined. They speak more than 50% of the world's language. So perhaps this point explains how biodiversity and the natural environment shape community's sense of place, and as a cultural determinant. Okay, so speaking of people, speaking of human, now here lies the real challenge. So increasing human population and overconsumption of resources that lead to habitat loss and ecosystem collapse, I reckon, are the biggest challenges facing the communities of the tropics. Loss of natural systems is expected to depress human well-being and livelihood. Flood protection, climate stability, crop pollination, and many other ecosystem services. So according to Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, almost 60% of these ecosystem services are being used unsustainably. This was exemplified by one of nature's wake-up calls. If you remember, if you can recall the 2004 tsunami, whose effects could have been smaller had the mangrove forests not been cleared in the affected areas. And similarly, habitat loss can facilitate the spread of zoonotic diseases. Contemporary deforestation seemed to lead to an increase in the distribution of mosquitoes, with concomitant increases in malaria transmission, as well as increasing human-wildlife conflict, which are hypothesized as the cause of the spread of the current pandemic we are facing at the moment, possibly more in the future. So very discouraging actually to see that even when humanity is negatively impacted by an environmental disaster, actions are usually inadequate. And these can also be illustrated by the recurring haze crisis in Asia, like Dr. Srina's pointed out just now. But then the actual situation is more dire than that. The number of threatened species, which is a measure of how much biodiversity is impacted as a consequence of natural and anthropogenic changes to the environment, and pressures from human interactions, including habitat loss, exploitation, and pollution, can have substantial impacts on biodiversity. So major loss in the number of plant or animal species can have wider effects on natural and human systems. So tropical biodiversity is particularly susceptible to environmental changes. So for all major groups assessed according to IUCN criteria, the tropics have the highest number and proportion of threatened species. And some regions have more species at risk, compared to others, with especially high number under threat in tropical Asia, the Amazon and island nations, especially in the Pacific. All right. So the one and only way to reverse this trend is to preserve remaining tropical forested ecosystems, particularly the primary forests. So formal recognition and protection offers the best opportunity to preserve the vital components of these systems and their services. I would like to attract your attention to this study by Matthew Batts and colleagues, which was published in Nature in 2017. So in this study, they use available forest loss data to test deforestation effects on IUCN red list categories of extinction risk for 19,000 plus vertebrate species worldwide. So as expected, deforestation substantially increased the odds of a species being listed as threatened and undergoing recent upgrading to higher threat category and exhibiting declining populations. So more importantly, they show that these risks were disproportionately high in relatively intact landscapes. Even minimal deforestation has had severe consequences for vertebrate biodiversity. They found little support for the alternative hypothesis that forest loss is detrimental in already fragmented landscapes. And the spatial analysis revealed high-risk hotspots. Okay, this is very close to us in Borneo, especially, and then in the Amazon, and also in the Congo Basin, Africa. So in these regions, the three regions, their model predicted that 121 to 219 species will become threatened under current rates of forest loss over the next 30 years. So given that only 17.9% of these high-risk areas are formally protected and only 8.9% have strict protections, so they propose that new large-scale conservation efforts to protect intact forests are necessary to slow deforestation rates and to avert new wave of global extinction. Fragmentation is a major driver of ecosystem degradation, reducing the capacity of habitats to provide many important ecosystem services. In this study, another study that I want to highlight was very recently published in Nature Scientific Reports. So Dale Brian Brown and colleagues conducted a multi-scale analysis using global estimates of mangrove density and regional drivers of mangrove deforestation to map relationship between habitat loss and fragmentation. And mangrove fragmentation was ubiquitous. However, there are geographic disparities between mangrove loss and fragmentation in some regions like Cambodia and the Southern Caribbean at relatively little loss, but their forests have been extensively fragmented. While in Southeast Asia, a global hotspot of mangrove loss, the conversion of forests to aquaculture and rice plantations were the biggest drivers of loss, more than 50%, and as well as on fragmentation. But surprisingly, conversion of forest to oil palm plantation, which is responsible for more than 15% of all deforestation in Southeast Asia, was strictly correlated to mangrove fragmentation. So therefore, the management of different deforestation drivers may increase or decrease fragmentation. So their findings suggest that large-scale monitoring of mangrove forests should also consider fragmentation. And this work highlights that regional priorities for conservation based on forest loss rates can overlook fragmentation and associated loss of ecosystem functionality. So with if I can quickly play this video. So fragmentation and compartmentalized management and jurisdiction of resources expose us to many issues, such as marine debris. Now that we're entering the Anthropocene era, the term where the term Anthropocene itself is derived from the adverse impact and the significant influence humans have on the planet. So all in all, diverse and healthy tropical nature ecosystems provide benefits vital for life on Earth, and human well-being and prosperity. So people rely on biodiversity and ecosystem services for sustenance, health, well-being, and enjoyment. So human communities derive all food and many medicines and industrial products from wild and domesticated components of biological diversity. And it is also the basis for many other economic, cultural and recreational activities. Probably it is human nature, yeah, that we only value things when we've lost them. But please, we do not want to go near that far. We, the people of tropics, especially must push harder to recognize and protect the values of our tropical biodiversity and their services. So protective mechanisms, right, like payments for ecosystem services, carbon financing, establishment of more protected areas, but for wise use, reforestation, rehabilitation program must be strictly carried out. It's vital also to communicate this across the tropics and to the global communities, so they would share the responsibilities on protecting and sustainably use these resources. And as I've highlighted throughout the talk, tropical biodiversity refers to the variety of life in the tropics, including every species of bacteria, virus, plant, fungi, and an animal, as well as the interactions between them and the ecosystem they live in. But then issues concerning tropical biodiversity and nature resources are cross-sectoral in nature, they're all encompassing, and they require collaborative interdisciplinary efforts from all stakeholders, including the scientific communities who would carry out all the studies to identify the species and whatnot. And of course the government, especially the managers of our resources, an important involvement of corporate sectors and public at large. So regardless of our interests, we must embrace the spirit of sustainability and embark on prioritizing the triple bottom lines of sustainable development. That is maintaining the environment, our resources, while sustaining our economy and social well-being for the benefit of the natural world and for our generations to come. I hope, I think that's about it. Thank you very much. Back to you, Hannah.
Thank you, Dr. Aldrie, for the insightful and very enlightening presentation on tropical biodiversity and natural resources. Now we have received several questions from the viewers, and the first question is on the support from the government on the Industry Revolution 4.0 and also big data and Internet of Things. So where are we currently, Dr. Aldrie, on the effort of incorporating this technology in conservation of natural resources?
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, like I pointed out earlier in one of the study that was carried out, I mean, the use of technology, especially for conservation effort, like GIS technology, right? This is very important. It is not just to identify or to spot the losses of mangroves or the forest or our resources, but then we need to further apply this technology for conservation, for example, right? So there are there were techniques being applied now, like to using drone, for example, for precision agriculture, like what Dr. Serena highlighted just now. But they are using this technology also to do reforestation activities. So technologies can be developed to suit the conservation efforts, for example. This is one very quick example that I can relate to, and the use of GIS to better manage or to better project the consequences. Like if you look at this on my the screen is gone. But okay, I mean the picture or image behind me, right? So like coastal environment is a very dynamic environment, right? So they can expand if sedimentation happens, they can propagate seaward, or they will move or retreat landward if erosion or there are increase in sea level rise. So to project this, we need technology, better support from sensing technology, especially using satellites and whatnot. So I reckon, yes, technology in the revolution does contribute to conservation effort, especially. Yeah?
Thank you, Dr. Lee. And the next question is from Mr. Lord Chiver Gitem from Zoom webinar. So his question is, when in the future years where oil and gas reserves has depleted, is there any alternative for resources substitutions that we can implement starting right now if enhances oil recovery won't help anymore, like water drives, gas drives, etc.?
Yes, correct. I mean, that's why the government, especially, and the global community are pushing for renewable resources, renewable energy. First, of course, to minimize the use of the use of current use of resources, fossil fuel, for example. But then, yes, there are alternatives. For example, also again, as pointed out by earlier speakers, Dr. Serena, like energy coming from alternative resources, should be pushed back from now, before it's too late. So, like I mentioned earlier, also we do not want to go near that far. Like when we lose everything, then we embark on looking for alternatives. No, it has to start now. So exploring other resources, I mean, not to exploit other resources or to dry out all other resources, but then alternative resources from renewable resources, like water, wind. So these are the way to go at the moment. So I reckon there are agencies, there are corporations, there are private sectors that are working on this, and it is going fairly well at the moment. And so many technologies has come from all over the world, and then the tropic is the center where all these resources are being explored at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, so which species, regarding to the IUCN Red List, so where are we right now, Dr. Aldrie, in the Red List? So what species is threatened currently, like locally in Malaysia? And also, what kind of technology do we need to sustain our natural resources in regards to the threatened species?
Okay. So we all were very sad, with the loss of the last badak Sumatra in Sabah the other day. And there are, I mean, basically big mammals, especially within Peninsular Malaysia and Borneo, are very much, most of them are very, very threatened. So basically, the key thing that needs to be done is to preserve more primary forests, which are the home of these organisms, especially megafauna or big fauna, especially. I mean, from the minuscule organism to the largest mammals we have on land. They need area, they need space, to live and to roam. So basically, intact forests is their habitat for roaming area, and they need, some of them, big mammals, they need larger roaming area. So if we have fragmented forests or patches of forest, it may not be sufficient for the life or for their survival. So this is where I think the government, especially Malaysian government, we are working on establishing the Central Forest Spine in Peninsular Malaysia. To one of the key objective is to ensure the survival and longevity of our organisms, basically, our biodiversity, not just the animals, the plants as well. So having more connected ecosystem, not unfragmented, not fragmented patches, will ensure the survival of these organisms. And the use of technology would be to support the identification of roaming areas, for example, and then the behavior of these animals, for example. So this needs to be linked and to be incorporated in our effort to protect our threatened species. I guess that answers your question, Hannah.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Aldrie.
All right.
And the next question is, can you share your views in regards of how far Malaysia is prepared with climate mitigation plan to conserve as well as to preserve our natural resources?
Okay. So how far are we ready? Yeah.
Yes. Correct.
Yeah, but I mean, if we refer to Professor Joy's presentation this morning, so there are some indicators or suggestions for the country to start applying or enforcing mitigation and adaptation measures. I don't think I'm not sure, but I don't think there are some any like a checklist that Malaysia has to do, right? But basically, we have our commitment to CBD to report on our nationally determined contribution, especially in for example carbon sequestration or carbon output. Yeah. So, and one of the ways I think there are patches. I mean, the effort may not be that completely consolidated or coordinated. So there are like patches of activities or efforts being carried out by different authorities or different organizations, for example, like for example like reforestation activities by NGOs. So yeah, I would like to suggest for us, the scientific community, to collaboratively maybe support or suggest to the government on what measures to be carried out based on the recommendation from global communities. So it is good for if we can identify uh, one coordinating entity, for example. It could be the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Energy and Nature Resources, and of course, when we talk about environment and resources, it is actually now scattered in various ministries, right? So we need a bridging in between these ministries as well to coordinate efforts, because as I mentioned earlier, issues pertaining to biodiversity, climate change is all encompassing. Basically, everyone is connected and everyone contributes to issues on climate change. So yeah, we need everybody's support and everybody's contribution and commitment to ensure that we are ready. So individually also we have to do the same. So to adapt and to mitigate, it's not just depending on the authorities, right? Every one of us, every individual must contribute as well, right? So as simple as you've seen, I mean, you probably see this issue, I mean, being viral in social media or in the news, on issues like marine debris, plastic litter, right? So as simple as managing our plastic, our waste, could contribute to the betterment of the countries or the global contribution in fighting climate change.
Thank you, Dr. Aldrie. So, with reference to bridging efforts between ministries and communities, we currently do not have a biodiversity act here locally in Malaysia. Do you think that will affect us in managing our natural resources?
We don't have Biodiversity Act, right? Is that your question?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay. All right, yeah. So we do have biodiversity policy, and you're right. And it is supported currently by oh yeah, I didn't mention about the legal issues concerning biodiversity. All right, okay. It is compartmentalized. You're right. So yes, policies need to be supported by laws, by legally binding laws or rules and regulations, right? So yes, I mean there should be some effort. I hope there is already efforts in place to come up with a biodiversity act. But then currently what they're doing is depending on compartmentalized or compartmentalized legal tools, right? For example, if matters pertaining to forest reserve, it will be under National Forestry Act. Issues concerning environmental factors, we depend on Environmental Quality Act. So it is very they still work in silos, especially in this issue. Like I mentioned also earlier, this is a connected or all-encompassing or cross-sectoral issue. So yes, I reckon your idea is I mean the question, the idea from this question is super excellent, because that could be the best bridging laws, hopefully to perhaps to bridge all of these. It's like umbrella law that can possibly assist us in managing better our resources and biodiversity. And I mean corresponding to that as well, national policy on climate change. So we have that also, but I don't think we have a climate change act at the moment, right? So maybe this is our opportunity. This is from this platform today. I hope the especially our friends in the government sector could identify this issue and work with us. All of us scientific community are very happy to contribute to the formulation of these laws, if it's not in place. But I'm pretty sure it's there. They're working on it, hopefully. So that's our opportunity to find an umbrella laws for biodiversity and climate change.
Oh, that's a good opportunity that came out of this discussion, Aldrie.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think pertaining to that as well, so earlier this year, there's an issue or perhaps a viral issue that went on social media regarding the Tunas Harapan forest that recently was destroyed because of development. So it is about 200 acres, I believe, of forest cleared completely, and it is a individual effort to cut the forest. It is not under state legislation. So what are your views pertaining to that, Dr. Aldrie, in terms of conservation?
Good, very good point. I purposely leave this out for discussion on community contribution, to assist the global community. Like I mentioned earlier, even a small patch of forest contribute a lot to carbon sequestration, in our fight for climate change. And it is very, very important for us to collaborate or to get the community involved, because local communities, especially they have been living in such areas, surrounded by their surrounding nature for many generations, and they know the area very well. And of course they depend, some of them depend directly on these habitats or small forest patches, or possibly it used to be larger, and encroach and develop. So they know the area fairly well, maybe very well. And then I mean, any effort or any kind of development should involve or I mean, involve, get their involvement here, so they have their say, especially particularly in conservation effort. I mean, I would like to actually suggest community-based resource management, because it's not really big, it's not really a thing yet in Malaysia. Maybe very patchy, but then they can, the community can be the eyes and ears for the authorities in enforcing laws, because this has happened, I mean, in other places around the tropics, right? So it can be done. strategically, co-work with the authorities and as well as the corporate sectors also. There are a lot of public private partnership also, and this, I mean, the collaborative work in conserving or protecting natural environment can be more effective if we work strategically, especially if we want to push for carbon financing, for example, or payment for ecosystem services. There is another key point, another good point that we need to be incorporated in that biodiversity law or act that you mentioned earlier, because payment for ecosystem services is the way to go, because especially for developing countries in the tropics, right? So all our resources contribute at the planetary scale, but then it is unfair for developed country, for example, to not allow developing countries to further develop. Of course, the traditional way of developing is exploiting resources, but then there are ways that can be developed for us to protect or conserve while growing our economy. So one of the best ways is payments of ecosystem services. So protecting forests, calculating the values, and not, for example, forests, not just the timber, it's beyond that. The whole ecosystem services that is being provided by these ecosystem must be counted. Imagine long-term and medium-term and long-term contributions of protecting resources that I've highlighted in the presentation earlier. So yes, kudos to all the communities, I mean, throughout the tropics for working hard, fighting their lives sometimes to protect environment and nature. So hear them, I mean, listen to them, learn from them, because traditional knowledge, traditional information, it needs to be documented as well, needs to be learned for better management. In fact, utilization of resources or development of bioproducts actually depend on the long-term use or traditional use by communities. So there you go, a lot of points to be included, and I will immediately call my friends at the ministry, so hopefully if they are working on Biodiversity Act and we need to incorporate payments for ecosystem services and community-based resource management, hopefully in that.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Aldrie. I'm afraid that is all the questions that we have for you today.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aldrie, for that wonderful presentation. Thank you. That's a
thanks
wonderful
again
discussion that we had.
I apologize. I haven't acknowledged the Mahathir Science Foundation Award and Academy of Science for inviting me. But thank you for the effort and all the best.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Aldrie, and have a great day ahead.